Three, two, one, action.
Action.
Welcome back to episode 3 of Creating Connection in Health and Wellness with your host, Kirsti, and the beautiful Demi.
Hello.
We're so excited to be back with some awesome topics for this episode. So what are we discussing this episode, Demi?
Oh my goodness. One of our favorites. We're going to be talking about alcohol. This is going to be a really fun episode because it's going to be very informative. But the reason why we think that this is such an important episode or topic to discuss is because, one, the impact that alcohol had on us through our adolescence and coming into the professionals that we are as well, but also the impact that it has on pretty much everyone. So I know that it's probably the same for you, Kirsti, but for a lot of clients that I work with, a really big thing that I help young women get past is the social drinking on the weekend, and moving past that to really capitalize and benefit their results that they're getting in the gym. So today's episode is going to be all about that, what alcohol does, what it interferes with when it comes to your results, our personal experiences with alcohol, and also at the end, obviously, because we're realists, we're going to give you guys some tips and tricks on how to manage your big nights out if you do have them. So that brings us to our experiences with alcohol. So we'll start there because I think that that's a pretty relatable thing. If you guys hear us talking about our experiences, then, it's not just us sitting here telling you don't drink, don't do this, don't do that. We can speak from experience because we've been here before ourselves, right? So, Kirsti, do you want to open up the floor with your experiences for alcohol?
Yeah, sure. No worries. So in terms of alcohol, it's something that was, I suppose, considered as a rite of passage, which I'm sure that if you're listening in terms of us growing up, it was something that was just like, it's a given. It's what you do on your 18th birthday. Everyone goes out, gets sloshed, all those sort of things. So I've been drinking since I'd before 18. Sorry, mum and dad, which they know now. Confessions of an adult. But in terms of that, I definitely had a few years, especially in my early 20s, of like some blackout years. This led to a lot of depression and anxiety. And it was honestly just a wild party time. And I feel it's very different now. I'm going to absolutely tell you that. It's a very different lifestyle to what I lead now. But it was something that was quite a prominent part of my life. And I thought that was something that I had to do to fit in. And throughout my years, I've realized that sometimes it's okay not to fit in and go off and do your own thing. So that's sort of where I'm at in aspects of the experiences I've had. How about for yourself, Demi?
Yeah, I love that you shared that. That's definitely very similar to me personally. I'm sure that if there's anyone listening to this podcast that knew me in my early 20s and in my teenage years, they would definitely be telling you that I was a quote unquote pisshead. I'm an absolute pisshead. I used to be like the life of the party. You could always count on me to be drinking if there was like a social event on back then. And I actually started drinking at a really young age. So 13 was when I first started drinking. So obviously you can imagine sort of the damage. And I look back now and I go, far out, the damage that I would have been doing to my body. And that was just something that it was, again, a social expectation, a rite of passage, but it also, unfortunately for me, it also looked fun when I saw everyone around me doing it too. So there wasn't really anyone in my life that was going, hey, that's actually really stupid. Like, you don't need to do that to be cool. So that's essentially my introduction to alcohol. But it's funny that you mentioned, like it's a rite of passage, going out, getting drunk on your 18th birthday. On my 18th birthday, because I had been going out underage using a fake ID since I was like 15 or 16. So on my 18th birthday, right, this is crazy, I got banned from two places, two pub clubs, two places in one night on my birthday, because they saw me there with my real ID and was like, you have been coming here for years. So both places in one night gave me a 6-month ban. So I got, that was my 18th birthday. Yeah, I know, I got banned. And then they were our local places. So for the next 6 months, every Friday and every Sunday, all my friends would go to these places. I couldn't go because I had a band. So that shot me in the foot big time. But that was just sort of like the effects of that whole lifestyle that I was living. And to be honest, I probably didn't pull myself out of that sort of excessive drinking until I'd say probably when I got back from overseas, because I was doing a lot of travel up until I was about 26. So it was such a big part of my life and how I socialized and communicated and made friends, especially when traveling too. So I guess like it's had its time and its place in my life, but even now still, like there's still events that I go to and drink a little bit too much. So anyone listening to this, it's not like we're fully, don't like, well, I mean, for the most part, I don't do it anymore, but there are every now and then events where I go and I have a few drinks and, everyone gets a little bit silly and it's just good natured fun. But I'm very aware these days of what that's actually going to do to my results. And there's a time and a place for it. Do you know what I mean? So I guess the biggest thing with this episode is really highlighting to people that, there's a time and a place. Ideally, if you're someone that can not drink, awesome. That's best case scenario. But if you are going to go out and have big nights, or if you are going to drink, there's a time and a place where it's going to interfere with your results less versus, it's definitely not ideal to be going out having big nights when you're in a fat loss phase, for example. So they're all the things that we're going to discuss and why. So yeah, that's my experience with alcohol consumption.
Thank you for sharing that, Demi. I'm sure a lot of listeners can relate to that and the rebellion years when you were younger.
Yeah, just laid all my cards out on the table.
I love it so much. Honesty is best in that aspect.
It's true. Like I've had people come up to me in recent years and be like, I would have, like, knowing you back then, I would have never expected you to actually be a woman that owns her own fitness business and has become a health coach and is, on social media, like all this sort of stuff. I just expected you to sort of, and I was like, well, yeah, let's, like it wasn't expected. That's the type of person that I was back then. So yeah, it's really cool.
It just goes to show that people evolve and that's okay as well. And which is really cool. But I thought we'd lead into what actually is alcohol. So, I'm sure a lot of the listeners listening in, alcohol might be like, oh, it's the thing that makes me feel good. It gives me confidence. It boosts me up. But I thought we'd also discuss in the terms of like what it actually is, what it's made up of. And then we're actually going to discuss the energy content, or in terms of kilojoules or calories, depending on the term that you're using. We're actually going to discuss how that affects and also affects, I suppose, the energy consumption that we have in our day-to-day life if we have this on the regular or weekends or whatnot as well. So in terms of what is alcohol, alcohol is actually a chemical compound composed of ethanol. So ethanol is an industrial chemical. So it's actually used as a solvent in the synthesis of other organic chemicals, such as gasoline. So for example, the stuff that we put in our cars. It's also classified, obviously, in terms of the intoxicating ingredient of many alcoholic beverages that we do consume, such as beer, wine, and also spirits. Also to note that alcohol is classified as a drug, which also just noted that when consumed in excess can become toxic and addictive, depending obviously on the individual as well. So just in terms of like the little background of what alcohol is, and then discussing the energy content of alcohol as well. So we've got 3 different things. So we've got the standard beer, which is around 150 calories per schooner. Then we also got a wine, which is around 150 calories per glass, which is about 118 mil. So as you were discussing before, as you were saying to me before this podcast, it's about like what, a quarter of a glass. Is that correct?
Oh God, it's like ladies, if you, and gentlemen, if you want to be severely disappointed, go and actually weigh out a glass of wine in a wine glass. It is a standard pour is not half of your wine glass. It is a smidgen. It's like the bottom of your wine glass. It's like the last sip. When you finish your wine glass, you got that little tiny little sip. That's pretty much a stat. No, I'm just kidding. It's not that low, but it's the first time I weighed my wine, I was like, holy shit, that's depressing. I was like, can I top it up with, I think I was on prep. And it was like, I might have been like 20 weeks until my show or something, and I had a glass of red wine, and then I weighed it out and I was like, holy shit, that's depressing. I need to like water it down, put some water in or something like that to make it feel like I'm drinking more. Yeah, so anyway, that's what I would say.
Helps with hydration. It's a double whammy. And then we've also got a standard spirit. So I know spirits are usual go-to, and we can discuss the different types of drinks and stuff as well in terms of what you can do in energy value and stuff as well. But it's usually around 90 to 100 calories per nip, which is a standard 30 ml of a straight spirit. So it's just really important to understand that, you know, whilst we do have energy content within alcohol, this is something to be considered, like as in Demi was just saying, that, you know, when she's on prep, it's a little bit more significant. And we're also going to be discussing later as well the differences between, you know, I suppose when to let your hair down a little bit more and whatnot in terms of I suppose the alcohol consumption, and also having that impact the results and also your overall health as well. So yeah. Awesome. Was there anything that you'd like to add to that as well, Demi?
There was. What I would actually also say is, and I think we're going to discuss it a little bit in a little bit more detail as well, is just remember that when you consume alcohol, it's not actually stored in the body. So we heavily rely on our liver to remove the alcohol from our system, which is the reason why people say like over consuming on alcohol can damage your liver. Because it puts a lot of stress and strain on your liver to essentially metabolize and excrete the alcohol from the system, because we don't actually store it anywhere. And that's one of the reasons why it will essentially leach nutrients from the system, because your liver needs all the enzymes it can get to sort of process all of that alcohol and push it out of the system. So that's why it can be also lead into having a detrimental health effect on us too. So absolutely. Yeah, and I would say that for anyone that, I mean, when we talk about a schooner in Australia, in Western Australia, we pretty much only drink pints. And that would be, so if we're talking about 150 calories per schooner, we're probably looking at more like 450 calories or 500 and 600 for a pint. So there's we can talk about the standard drink, but then we also have to relate that to what people are actually consuming, thinking it's a standard drink. Because for the most part, I know that most people, even restaurants, they don't even pour 100 ml serve of wine. They pour 150 ml serves of wine. So yeah, that would be definitely the difference between those two. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a really important point as well. So in terms of like how your body processes it too. So you might notice that when you start consuming alcohol, you need to go to the toilet quite a lot more. That's because your body is trying to excrete the toxins that you're actually consuming out through your urine. So it's actually your body's way of, I suppose, processing and detoxifying by going to the toilet so much more frequently in terms of that. So that's important to note. So, you know, everyone needs to do it. So that's why it actually happens in terms of that. It's your body's natural way of going, I'm getting this out of my body.
Yeah.
But yeah, which leads us into, I suppose, in terms of the effects on alcohol, in terms of like what it actually does within our body. So essentially, when we do consume alcohol, it does blunt, and depending on how much we do consume in that time, can actually blunt a lot of metabolic processes that happen within the body. So one of those things is in terms of protein synthesis. So this is our ability to be able to create new body proteins within the body. So for example, our muscle growth, in terms of our hair, skin, nails, pretty much anything that's made up of proteins within the body, which our DNA is actually made up of proteins as well. So essentially that actually blunts that effect when we consume it in large amounts. So it's just something to be mindful of, is that when you do consume alcohol, is that protein synthesis will be halted until the toxin ethanol is excreted from the body.
Yeah. And it also has a significantly detrimental effect on your ability or your strength training. So it actually reduces your strength in the gym. So your ability to actually go in and give a good quality session is hindered. So again, indirectly, that's going to lead to potentially creating or the need for an anabolic response. Because if you can't push hard in the gym, you're not going to be stimulating muscle growth in itself anyway.
Yep. Essentially, yes. And then that can also lead to, depending on how you're feeling about it too, around the language of how you are performing in the gym as well. So that's really important to be mindful of. It's a knock-on effect. So these are sort of things just to take note of if you do consume alcohol, especially on a regular basis.
Yeah.
In terms of other things that it does affect, is another thing as well, is our cognitive thinking. So I'm sure I can speak when I have been out on a big night, like a kebab or like McDonald's, or like I do something stupid. Like I think back and you're like, you do so many silly things when you're younger, like trying to be cool. Like, I don't know in terms of that, but it actually affects our cognitive thinking in that aspect. So in terms of this, what actually happens is when we consume alcohol, it also, I suppose, blunts the effects of blunts the connection of our prefrontal cortex, which is our frontal lobe part of our brain, which is responsible for thinking, doing, action taking, all those sort of things, and also being able to make rational decisions in that moment. So as you can understand that if we are consuming alcohol, you feel those, like, you lose your inhibitions, as they say, and you're off doing the things, and you're like, okay, I'm doing the things. And then, like, you wake up the next day and you're sort of like, what did I do? It's essentially because you've switched off that part of your brain and gone completely blackout, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. And that's also something on that. It just triggered my memory from my interaction with a counsellor at one point in time. I was speaking to her about some things, and like one of the subjects came up about my response to a situation when I had been under the influence of alcohol. And I just said, for obvious reasons, I felt like my emotions were really quite heightened, and I don't feel like I would have responded that way had I have been sober. And she said that they can actually prove that when you are under the influence of alcohol, your emotions are quite heightened. And that would also link to essentially not having access to your prefrontal cortex. The only part of your brain that you have access to is the emotional brain. So emotional and reactive. So it's like, that makes so much sense why people are so much more emotional when they drink. They lose their ability to think rationally. And they're very responsive and reactive. And I think that that's pretty consistent with what we see when we see people heavily drinking too.
Absolutely. That is a very important point to note. As you can see, like, it's different. It's like those three sort of points, it all marries up together. So if you're listening in, have you ever had that experience? We'd love to know as well. More than welcome to send us a message around that as well.
Yeah. If that's something that's affected you, give us a shout out, like, let us know.
Awesome. So I suppose that leads into our next point. Did you want to discuss around the terms of fat metabolization as well, how it blunts the fat oxidation process?
Yeah. So essentially, when you are consuming alcohol, what will happen is your body will prevent you metabolizing fat because it needs to metabolize the alcohol that's in your system. So pretty much all of your other metabolic processes are needed to be blunted to then be able to remove the alcohol from your system. And this is something that is very reflective of the fact that your body recognizes alcohol as a threat to the system, because it will literally stop other metabolic processes. Similar to when you consume carbohydrates as a natural byproduct of the consumption of carbohydrates, because that's your body's preferred source of energy, it will stop fat metabolization for a short period of time whilst it metabolizes the carbohydrates in the system. Same thing happens with alcohol, except it stops fat metabolization for an extended period of time until the alcohol's out of the system. But also, not only that, if you are trying to diet and then you're heavily consuming alcohol, you're bumping up your calorie intake quite significantly potentially, and then your body's like, well, what do we do with all of this energy that we're getting? We're not going to metabolize fat because we need to deal with this energy. So is there anything you want to add to that as well on the fat metabolization?
In terms of like what you were just saying around energy, that was a really good summary in terms of that. And like, just, I suppose, speaking in terms of those calories, they do classify alcohol as empty calories because, we do speak about energy, but it has no nutritional value. So for example, when you speak to carbohydrates, even in terms of the process, but proteins and also fats, they all have nutritious value. So, macronutrients and micronutrients. Alcohol is its own macronutrient of its own, but energy, but it's empty energy. So it's just important to note that as well. That's a really good point.
Yeah, exactly. It has no nutritional value, and it doesn't actually have any benefit to the body. It provides you with, like we've explained, it actually is a threat to the system. So the body's like, stop everything else. Let's deal with this alcohol that you've just smashed me with.
Pretty much. That is a perfect summary. That is a really good summary of how it's saying that. It essentially goes into survival mode.
Yeah.
In terms of sleep as well. So alcohol must not be confused with quality sleep because it usually acts like a hypnotic sedative. So in terms of this, it's like a drowsy sort of sleep when you do consume it. So, especially if you've ever had like a big night out or like you've had a few wines and whatnot, and you're like, you still wake up the next day and you're hungover because toxins and that, but you're also feeling completely ruined because you haven't had a good quality sleep. It's usually because alcohol disrupts our restorative or our rapid eye movement sleep. So this is our REM sleep. So this is where we also do like most of our dreaming and I suppose flushing out the toxins within our body as well. We're actually unable to get into that restful sleep. So we could actually experience daytime drowsiness, exhaustion, and weak concentration after alcohol consumption. And as you know, sleep is super important for everything. It's one of the fundamentals for good health. It's vital for tissue repair, recovering muscles, brain tissue, and alcohol, because of this, can also cause those tiny periods of awakenings that actually hinders us from getting that restorative sleep to be able to go through all those processes of repair and recovery as well.
Yeah, massive. So if anything else, that alone, with our excessive alcohol consumption, especially. So yeah, and on top of that as well, when you have consistently poor sleep, or if you have nights of poor sleep, like remembering that you can't actually catch up on sleep. You can essentially accrue sleep or the effects of good sleep, or like you can say, for example, throughout the week, you can get an extra 2 hours of sleep a night and you're getting the benefits of essentially accrued sleep, but you can't actually catch up on sleep. So if you have a shit night's sleep, or, you go out on the piss, you have a bad night, or wake up and then you spend all of Sunday in bed napping, you're not catching up on sleep. The detriments of that poor quality sleep has already been something that your body's experienced. So you can't really undo that. You can essentially accrue sleep, but you can't catch up on it. So once it's done sort of thing for your system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important, I suppose, point to note around sleep as well. I think we should do a full episode on sleep and actually like all the full effects on that, because that would be a nice little one for people to learn about as well, which is important.
Yeah.
Awesome. And in terms of another thing as well that it affects within our body is also our hormone levels. So we were just discussing before in terms of like testosterone, which leads obviously to strength and all those sort of things as well. But
yeah,
alcohol can actually, excessive drinking can lower our testosterone levels in both men and women. So this can decrease our libido, so our sex drive, diminish muscle growth, and also enhance the risk of osteoporosis, which is essentially weak bones, plus other things that it can affect, like in terms of like our organs and our brain and all those sort of things as well. But in terms of hormones, one is also it lowers testosterone. So it's really important to note too.
Yeah, so lowering testosterone and other anabolic hormones within the body, not on top of that, with its effects on performance and also on muscle protein synthesis, these are the metabolic processes that we need to build healthy, strong ligaments and bones and muscle tissue. So if we're consistently consuming heavy amounts of alcohol, we're actually increasing our risk of bone disease, muscle degenerative diseases and things like that too. And if you're somebody that is autoimmune compromised as well, it's going to only enhance that further. And on top of that as well, one of the things that happens with alcohol when you consume it is it actually increases the rate of nervous system desensitization. So that's why people call alcohol a depressant, because it actually does dull all of your sort of nerve responses. So you actually become desensitized in a sense. And it also does have an impact on your leptin levels and serotonin levels as well. So all those things are impaired when you do consume heavy amounts of alcohol.
Yeah, that's really important to note. And for the listeners that don't know what leptin is, that's our appetite regulation hormone. So in terms of knowing when we're hungry or not. And then also serotonin is our happy feel-good hormone that is definitely depleted after a night out. So if you ever feel like that at the end, like after the day out, understand that all these things are happening because your body stops all those things and depletes everything to be able to get ethanol out of your body as soon as it can. So it's just important to note that. So I suppose in terms of, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that, Demi?
Yeah, there was something that I wanted to go down the route of, like talking about alcohol and how it affects our food consumption. I think that that's a really important thing to note, because obviously if you were listening to this podcast and you weren't aware prior to listening that alcohol has a significant amount of calories, but it doesn't actually impair your ability to, it doesn't actually have an effect on satiety. So when you consume alcohol, you don't necessarily feel full. So if you're going out for dinner and you have a glass or two of wine with your dinner, that's not typically going to stop you from consuming as much food. Maybe if you're aware and you're being mindful of your calorie consumption, you would alter potentially the type of meal that you have or the caloric density of the meal that you have to accommodate for fitting in some alcohol to your calories. But if you're somebody that's typically unaware of calories in food, it's unlikely that you'll go out and have 1 or 2 glasses of wine with dinner and say, oh, okay, I've had 2 glasses of wine, so I'm going to hold off on the entree, or, I'm not going to ask, I'm going to ask them not to put any chips on my meal. Like, you're not necessarily going to do that, but you don't often feel full from consuming alcohol because it does inhibit leptin anyway. So you actually it can potentially lead to more food consumption as opposed to not having any alcohol.
Yeah, and that's really, really important to note because, like we said before, like with the impact on food consumption is that, it can be really hard to regulate and control in terms of that. So we'll discuss in terms of like the different phases of when, recommending when to do so and when not as well.
Yeah.
I also wanted to add in as well, just one other point is around the functioning of the hippocampus, which is located in our brain around the formation of memories. So, how like I was speaking about, like in terms of like getting blacked out and all these sort of things, essentially what happens is that if we can't form new memories, we can't learn and store information, which can make it a little bit harder for us to be able to go, okay, I'm learning from this experience, I won't do that again, because sometimes that can be inhibited from actually being able to be stored information in that aspect too. So it can be, depending on how you look at it, it can be quite a detrimental thing to progression in many different ways in terms of health. That's why it's also important to be so mindful of how it can truly affect your body, food consumption, health functions, everything in terms of that as well. So that's really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what we're talking about a lot at the moment is alcohol in terms of excessive consumption. So all of these things, even 1 to 2 glasses of wine or 1 to 2 beers can can have those detrimental effects on your sleep, definitely, which then on top of that leads to things like hormone dysregulation and potentially like strength decreases and stuff like that if you're not getting enough sleep. So even in small amounts, alcohol can be indirectly linked to all of the things that we're discussing. But when you see the biggest sort of detrimental effect on the body is when you overconsume on alcohol, or when you binge drink, or what's considered to be binge drinking. But they can pretty consistently show that when you, like, the correlation between binge drinking and obesity is pretty significant. But if you're to consume like 1 to 2 drinks per night every day of the week, that's less, that's consistently shown to be less associated with obesity. So there's, again, all of the health risks that come along with storing excess adipose tissue around the vital organs, and obesity and increased BMI and all that sort of stuff. So when we talk about it being, there is a difference between consuming 1 to 2 drinks per night versus binge drinking, and the effects that it will have on the body. So yeah, that's really important to remember. But in my opinion, if you have significant goals in the gym or body composition goals, the less alcohol you drink, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really important point to note as well, which would sort of lead us into, I suppose, what is the recommended amount, right? So this is something that's really important to discuss. So I feel like everyone's going to have different amounts. I've had some conversations with people and clients I've worked with before, and they're like, the amounts until I can't stand up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like everyone has definitely different preconceived.
The amount is see how much I can drink and still stand up.
No. So I suppose in terms of guidelines, it's around 1 standard drink. So we're speaking in terms of like the 1 schooner, the 1 wine glass, which is like 100 ml, and the 30 ml nip for a female. One standard drink, no more than that per day, and no more than 2 standard drinks per day for a male as well. So and that's to have that's to have the lesser chances, so what you were just saying there, of having those ill health effects and all those sort of things as well. But I mean, come on, in the Australian society, who drinks just 1 drink? Who? I don't know. I don't know. Every person that I know that consumes alcohol, it's like has one and then like that's it. It's gone like, oh, like a couple bottles of wine down. Like, you know, I've definitely been there. I could never hide that in that aspect. Like, you know, I definitely noticed my inhibitions go, whoop, okay, my ability to go, okay, this is smart. And then not so smart.
Oh, like, look, even I 100% agree with you. Like, even just like yesterday, my best friend lives around the corner from me, and I don't get to see her very often. And I went over to her house yesterday afternoon because I've been working 7 days a week lately, and I had 3 glasses of wine just sitting there talking to her. Honest, but I had them over the course of a few hours and I could still drive home. Well, I say a few hours, I mean more like 5 or 6, but I could still drive home. But it got to the point where I was like, you know, we'd had 3 glasses and I was like, oh my God, it's 10 o'clock. And I was like, I have to go home. I need to have I need to sleep. But 3 glasses of wine, and that was all I've drunk for a couple of weeks. Do you know what I mean? So it is like you have to really pick your battles and establish what is actually going to be too much and what is something that you can justify and still get up and do the shit you got to do. Because I think that's the biggest thing as well with how alcohol affects our lifestyle is it stops people doing what they really need to be doing. Like, how often have you had something planned for the next day and you go out and you drink too much the night before and you can't even get yourself where you need to go? Or you're late, or you sleep in, or you put it off till the afternoon, or whatever. So
I don't drink often anymore, if like at all. Well, I do throughout the year, but I'm very periodically for that very reason, because it affects me so significantly when I consume alcohol. I'll be written off for a whole week. Like a whole, and like where we are at now in our lives, there's no time for that for me personally. There's no time for me to have downtime in through to those sort of actions. But that doesn't mean I won't not have a drink. You know, I'll pick my occasions, like you were just saying before. Like I pick and choose. So I'll be like, okay, cool. I might have 4 events this year. Like for example, I've got you know, like a hens party coming up later this year. You know, I'm not going to be, oh no, sorry, I'm not going to do that. I'll block out time for myself. I'm usually in terms of that, and also in terms of stay super hydrated and moderate what I consume too. Within reason, of course.
Oh, I'm like that too. Like I cannot handle a hangover. I'm really bad. My partner Aaron will often, he's fine the next day. And I can't do it. So even any more than 2 drinks for me, like if I had those 3 glasses of wine any faster than what I had them over the space of 5 hours, then I probably wouldn't have woken up feeling good today. Do you know what I mean? And I pretty much got home at 10:15 and went straight to sleep and woke up at 7. So I still got a decent amount of sleep. It might not have been the quality sleep that I probably could have got if I didn't have those 3 glasses. But when it comes to consuming alcohol these days, like you said, Kirsti, I genuinely don't have the time to have the brain fog, the fatigue. These days, alcohol consumption affects me for 3 to 4 days after. And I'm not sure if this is actually a really important thing to note, and potentially something to recognize for the listeners is that how long has alcohol actually been affecting you for this long, and are you just noticing it now? So I know that if I was like 18 or 20 or 23 and I have a couple of big nights out, was the alcohol still affecting me for 3 days back then and I just didn't notice it? Whereas now I'm more aware and I'm in tune with my body, and I've taken my body to much higher performing places where if I consume alcohol these days, I really feel that in my system for the next 3 to 4 days. Like I feel fatigued. I feel like lack of concentration. I feel demotivated. Generally pretty common for me to get is post-night anxiety. So when I wake up in the morning, I've got anxiety, even though I might have full recollection of the night before. I know I didn't do anything stupid, but I still have that underlying tone of anxiety, which really freaking irritates me. I hate that feeling. So it's a good question to pose, is like, are you feeling shit for the next 3 days and you're just not noticing it? Or do you know what I mean? As we get older, do we start to feel it more and it starts to affect us more?
I think, that's a really good question. And because it sort of opens up so many doors. Like one, a lot of people don't notice or aren't aware of how it truly affects them. They're like, oh, I just feel like shit during the week. And then I get to Friday and I repeat the cycle, and they're not taking notice of actually what the cycle is. And I suppose, as we get older too, the responsibilities change a little bit more. I think from my hospo days working in a bar, I mean, I think I was drunk for like 4 nights of the week. These days, as I moved into more management roles throughout my career and before I became a business owner, the stakes got a little bit higher, but then I also got a little bit more wiser in terms of how it affected me as well. So I suppose it's a combination of education, which hopefully you guys listening in get some education from this today, because everyone always tells you not what to do, but they don't ever tell you sort of why. And that just comes down to sort of like an educational point. And so hopefully you guys get something from that today as well, in terms of, you know, what you can take from it. And you, at the end of the day, it's your lives, right? You can do whatever you feel. We can give you the information. It's up to you on how you want to use it. But learning from our experiences, from the fact that we've gone from party days to actually evolving through our lives and understanding and being able to educate others and, you know, lead them to a more healthier, more balanced lifestyle in terms of doing other different things for fun. Which we could touch on actually if you'd like to as well, because I know that you help your clients go from, you know, those sort of party days to their more healthier lifestyle, if you'd like to speak about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that in my coaching career has actually made me quite an appealing coach, or an approachable coach, in that sense, where I am pretty public on my Instagram when I'm having a drink, especially when I travel. Usually when Aaron and I go on our big travel trips, I'll have like everyone that follows me kind of has this underlying, like this personal joke with me about emu export, because that's what we drink when we're away. And we do these things called chook cracks, and it's just kind of a little bit of a laugh. And people see me consuming alcohol, but still maintaining like a healthy mindset. I still work out while I'm away and all these. So I think the biggest thing is like weekends and holidays, or traveling, for people that need help navigating their alcohol consumption. But I think that as a coach, as I was saying, that's something that's made me quite an approachable coach, because females see me doing these things and they're like, well, I want to do that too. But a lot of the time I have to actually educate them on how I got to this place where I can have more lifestyle balance. So for example, like I've gone from being the teenager that the very first time I got kicked out of home was because I got drunk on a Sunday in the middle of the day. And my dad had said, no more alcohol, don't drink. And I, like, looking back, I'm like, I totally had a problem with alcohol. Like, Dad should put me into rehab or something. But I actually got kicked out. Dad called Mum and said, Mum, you have to come and get her. I can't have her living here anymore. And that was when I was like 15 or 16. And then going through, like, I still probably didn't learn my lesson until early 20s. But I actually gave up alcohol completely for about 9 months, completely gave it up. And so lots of women have this idea that they might be able to overcome their alcohol consumption problems by just going back to moderate consumption. Often you have to get yourself to the point where there's something else that's more valuable to you than partying on the weekends. Usually I can help women get to that point by showing them how good they can feel in the gym and how good they can feel about themselves when they track their nutrition, or they start to see their body composition change, and trying to get them to reduce their alcohol just enough, or reduce their partying just enough to start to see those benefits, is the way that I can start to get that small little light going on in their brain, going, holy shit, if I just pull back on the alcohol consumption over the weekend. And often I have to coach them about, you're not going to miss out on anything on the weekends. Like, I've traveled around the world and come home to my hometown where I still live now and have all the same friends, and I feel like I haven't missed anything. Do you know what I mean? Like, they're like, you know, they're still my friends. They're still here. They've watched me go through these phases, and now I can quite easily go out for dinner or something with them, and I don't have to drink, or I can go to a birthday party and I don't have to drink, and they just know that that's me now. So helping women understand that, like, the fear of missing out, you don't have to have that as a thing. You can just, all it takes, and I can't stress this enough, all it takes is to do it once. All you got to do is go out once and say, sorry, I'm not drinking. Do it once, stick to your guns once, and then you will realize that it's actually not that bad. You don't miss out on anything, and you feel great the next day. But I help women get past that sort of stuff by showing them how they can feel really great about themselves without the alcohol consumption. But then I would be in favor of saying that there has to come a point in time where you kind of give it up completely, so that you can detach yourself from that, that need to have it have a good time. And that's what I had to do. So lots of women see me out and about, like having a casual drink here, and, you know, maybe even every now and then I go out and I have a bigger night, like a hens do, like you're talking about. But what they don't see is that I went through 9 months of just completely giving up alcohol, and I trained hard. I tracked my macros. I did everything I needed to do for my mental health. And I can say with conviction that that was a really positive thing for me to be able to do. So yeah, there's that. I think it's definitely helping people understand that they don't necessarily need alcohol, but when they see how good they can, or like when they start to see the body composition changes and they realize that there's something they want more than that night out on the weekend, that's when you can start to get people changing their lifestyles around alcohol.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I resonate with that so much. And I love your story and behind of like where you were to where you are now, and how you're helping people in that aspect too. And
yeah,
I definitely resonate with that so much. And it's simply just in terms of like being able to show them the possibilities of what you can do outside of that sort of life. You can still have it in terms of that, like, you know, like you said, you know, every now and then we go out and have a nice drink and things like that too. But at the same time, it's about, I suppose, building that awareness and showing them like the other side, like the other lens of what it's like to go out on an adventure and wake up fresh, and show you, like, you can lead by example. Like, for example, with the friends that I have, you know, we started off as party friends, but we now go on nice walks or hikes together instead. We get to catch up and connect in that way instead. And that doesn't mean we won't go out for a drink, you know, once or twice a year, but, you know, at the same time, we'll go and do things that still set our soul on fire, and you know, work on the things that, you know, like I always ask myself the question, like when it comes to these sort of things, this is the question I've asked myself: is it the alcohol that I wanted, or is it the connection?
That social connection.
Always social connection. And I suppose in terms of like asking yourself, it's like, you know, what is it that you actually want out of this situation? You know, is it that you want to, you know, connect with your friends in that way? Is there another way you could potentially do it and change it up? Instead of going out every weekend, go, okay, hike, adventure, brekkie, maybe going out, you know, space it out depending on what your lifestyle looks like. So the beautiful thing is we are the creators of our universe. We can have whatever we feel like in that aspect. And but it's just important to factor in health, which also social connection is part of that as well. So hence why probably a lot of people drink. I know I did, for social connection. Then I realized that it can be done in so many different ways.
100%. Yeah, I agree. And that's something that's so important to note as well. A big thing that I'm always recommending for clients is try and do something that's not, especially when you have pretty significant health and fitness goals, whether that be body composition or strength or training, whatever it is, try and start associating like social connection or disassociating social connection with food and alcohol. Like, we're in society, we're so programmed to integrate socializing with food and drinking. It's like socially conditioned to just do that. So I'm like often saying, okay, well, think about ways that you can catch up with your friends without having to drink. Maybe go for a coast walk, grab a coffee, maybe go like do something creative and artistic if that's what you're into. Get down the beach on the weekends and don't take an esky with you. Like, take some snacks that you can track and all that sort of stuff. Like, have a sugar-free drink or something like that instead, that's not associating socializing with alcohol consumption or over excessive on, or like excessively consuming food as well. So that's a big one.
Absolutely. And that also, I suppose, ties in with the fact that it's okay to say no as well, and not have to explain yourself in that aspect if you've got something that you want to do for you. And that's something that, you know, it takes comfort, it takes courage and confidence to be able to say no to people that you love dearly. And it feels like, oh, that fear, like what you were saying before about, you know, going out and not drinking or doing those sort of things. It's like, oh, like it can be like hard the first time. Like it's the unknown, like, will my friends still like me? All these sort of like things. But it's like you said, nothing will change unless you want it to change. And, you know, the change could be a positive change in the fact that you can still go out, still hang out with your friends, still connect. If that's what they want to do, then so be it. But at the end of the day, if you want to transition away from that lifestyle, you can, if you wish to. It just will take a little bit of courage, confidence, and also I suppose, space to go, okay, cool. All right, I'm going to be doing the thing, right?
Yeah.
And, putting yourself, I suppose, into that energy to be able to do that as well. So I love this.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good thing as well too. Something that came up to me while you were talking, and it's about to slip out of my brain. So it's like, it's like, I think it's such a powerful thing to be able to say no when everyone else is doing it. And something that I had a laugh with my nephew about, because he's just turned 18, that he went to a party with his friends and he chose not to drink. And he was like, I just did it because I wanted to. I wanted to be able to turn around and say no to people who were all doing something that I didn't necessarily feel like it. And, obviously he got the peer pressure at the party, and he just said, he was like, no, I'm fine. And he stayed sober the whole night. And he was like, I could have drunk if I wanted to, but I just wanted to be able to feel what it would be like to say no, and everyone, like, no one could believe that he was not drinking. And he was like, I just wanted to have the willpower to be able to say no and be in control of my own decisions. And I was like, at 18 years old, like, why didn't I get that wisdom when I was 18? But like it resonates, because it's such a powerful thing to be able to say, no, I'm not going to drink, even though everyone else is, and I'm going to stick to my guns with it, because that's, in a sense, going to help you build self-confidence and self-esteem too. When you can do things that you say you're going to do, that is one of the fundamental ways that you can actually build self-esteem. So it's building trust within yourself as well. Like I said, you just have to have something else that you want more than the alcohol consumption over the weekend, or that sort of like a big night out. But they are fun from time to time, which is probably a good thing that we should go through some ways to handle a big night out. Because whilst we can tell you all the negative effects that that you're going to experience from over consuming on alcohol, we're also still realists about the fact that people are still going to do it, even when we know the detrimental effects. Like myself personally, I'm a classic example. I know better than a lot of people what alcohol does, but I still go out and have big nights. So a couple of tips on how to manage it if you do. What I would suggest very first and foremost is, there's a time and a place. So if you're in a fat loss phase, don't bother with it. Like I would 100% say that there is no place for heavy alcohol consumption or any alcohol consumption when you're in a dieting phase. If you're in a building phase, you can have a little bit more wiggle room. But again, I wouldn't be consuming any more than one drink in a building phase, because of the effects that it has on your muscle protein synthesis. So especially for females, we have to put so much time and effort and intention into building muscle that why would you bother doing something that's going to potentially interfere with that or slow down your progress? Because it takes long enough as it is. But when it comes to, if there's a time and a place to have a big night out, it would be when you don't have any significant goals that are like drawing you towards needing to perform well in the gym or needing to stick to your calories and your macros. And I would say for special occasions, but the very first thing I get all my clients to do is I get them to make sure that they have meal prep or food in the fridge for the next day that's going to help them get back on track. And I don't just say like, oh, make sure you have a salad. It's like, make sure you have some food at home that you're going to enjoy eating that you can easily track. So go and prep like a spaghetti bolognese or like healthy grilled chicken parmigiana, sort of like, the type of food that's going to be kind of like giving you a fix and, replacing some electrolytes and stuff like that for you, but not going to KFC. So I'm going to keep you out of KFC, going to keep you out of the fast food, but it's also going to help you like stick to your calories and your macros the next day. I would also say that when you get home, a hot tip for anyone that's had a heavy night drinking is have an up and go before you go to bed, or milk of some sort, because of the hydration properties in it. Before you go to bed, it can actually help you. It's got sodium, carbohydrates, and electrolytes. So they're my 2 tips.
Interesting hot tip. I've never heard about the milk or the up and go.
Yeah, try it. Most people are like, milk before you go to bed. But every time I've done it, it's made a difference for me in my hangover the next day.
I love that. Hot tip. I like that. The tips I would add in terms of this, if you're going to have a big night out as well, is space out your drinks with water. That's something that I personally love to do, and I advise my clients to do, is that, if you have a drink, get it in a tall glass. If you're having it with like a nip, or depending on what you have, but then have like a water in between. So stay hydrated, because, alcohol is dehydrating. It obviously takes away like the electrolyte balance within our, and the water balance within our body as well. So, staying hydrated does help in that aspect. And obviously a lot of people, limit drinking water because it helps them pee so much more, but it actually helps us in terms of being able to process that throughout our bodies and come to the end of the night and not having dehydration headaches and all those sort of things as well.
Yeah.
Other tips I would also have as well is eat before you go out, because a lot of times if you go out drinking on an empty stomach, one, that can lead to overconsumption or overeating, depending on where you're at, if you're not, satiated in terms of that aspect. But also in terms of is that once you do start drinking, the nutrient absorption does change within our bodies as well. So ensuring that we're having a nice balanced meal before we go out is good. But like Demi said, I definitely agree with that tip as well, as having meals ready to go at home, so you've got something to look forward to when you get home, because everyone's always hungry after a big night. I still remember making chicken fried rice with my friends and they were like, how can you do this, like we're all hungover? And I was like, I've got to do it because I know it will make me feel better. And it does, it truly does. When you eat good foods afterwards, you're not, I don't know, you just feel sluggish if you eat the other stuff. Like, doesn't mean that you don't have it, but like in terms of that's a really good tip too. So and what else would I add to that as well? I think we mentioned it before earlier, is that, is pick your events as well. So, picking it out and spacing it out throughout the year is like what you said in the different phases and whatnot too. And just be mindful, right? Be mindful of the fact of how you may feel after the event, draw attention. How do you feel? How do you act? What kind of person do you become after you consume alcohol? Like, are you productive or are you not? What, in terms of work, if you've got that flexibility to be able to go, okay, cool, these few days, it's going to be like the bare minimum, and then I can hit the ground running again. And if you don't have that flexibility, it's like, well, where do you need to rein it in to ensure that you still get to perform in the ways that you want to? And that's not just work, but that's also like communication with your partner, your friends, or whatever. Like, do you turn into a different person because your hormones and your mood is like, your serotonin's depleted and you can't regulate, like all these sort of things are
always asking yourself what the trade-off is.
And just picking, like, just pick and choose your events, so it just like going, like, for example, I'll pick one every couple of months and I'll go, okay, cool, and I plan in advance. But that's something that I personally do now because I know how severely it affects myself. So that would be something that I would highly recommend, is like getting aware with yourself and building that awareness within yourself. Like, how do you show up? But don't worry about anyone else. How do you show up, and how do you want to show up as well after you consume alcohol? So
yeah, I completely agree. They're really good points. Before we wrap it up, though, I do want to just quickly make sure we answer this question that I got from Amelia, one of my clients. She asked, does alcohol have the same effect when you cook it in food? And this was a really interesting one. I didn't actually know the answer to the question, but I did a little bit of research. And I was actually under the impression that, if you cook alcohol, if you cook, say, for example, if you're adding wine, this is what I do quite often, I add wine to bolognese. And I thought, pour it into the pan, cook it off for, 5-10 minutes, and you're cooking out the alcohol, and then you chuck your food in and stuff. It actually takes way longer to cook out alcohol in food. It's like you need at least half an hour to start cooking down the alcohol. And you anywhere from like half an hour to 2 hours, and you're only really reducing the ethanol content by like 25 to 40% in that time. So that's insane. So essentially, if we're to look at based on what we know, you could draw the conclusion that yes, alcohol will still have those same effects on you if you're consuming it in food. But the level of effect it will have, or the level of detriment that it actually has, does depend on how long you cook it and how much you use. So obviously it won't have the same effects if you're to, drink 2 glasses of wine versus put 2 glasses in your food and cook it for 2 hours. You'll be consuming less ethanol by that point, but the little ethanol that you do consume will still have that effect, whatever that might be. So guess it's dependent on how much you're using, how long you cook it for. But my lesson learned there is that it actually takes way longer to cook out the ethanol than I thought. I thought it was like, just whack it in the pan, simmer it off for a bit, and you're good to go.
I didn't know that either until you told me that as well, which is really important, because I love a good red wine stew with my steak when I go out for dinner.
And it all depends on how long you cook it. But yeah, so great question, Amelia. Thank you for sending that in. And if anyone's got any questions after this episode, please just give us a message on Instagram. And if you're listening to this episode, take a screenshot, post it on your Instagram, tag myself and tag Kirsti, and then awesome. Good.
No, thank you so much for listening in. We're super excited to be able to bring you this episode. We hope that you've learned some awesome things throughout this as well. It's something that we feel really passionate about to also share as well. So as Demi said, like, share, and also save. Tag us in your socials. And if you feel that you are loving us in your ears, every fortnight, please give us a 5-star rating on Spotify and also on YouTube. Give us a rating. We'd love to know. It helps us out so much. But we all hope you have the most beautiful day whenever you listen into this, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.